Well, I wanted to start off this session with a joke, but I felt like it was what I was working with was too corny. So we're going to go on and into the seedling pests. There we go. All right. So with field corn, our seed treatments really do take a lot of seedling pests out of the equation. But having said that, none of the seed treatments are perfect, and they can, we occasionally do see seedling injury from various insect pests. I'm going to give a quick overview of some of the pests that are most likely to cause injury to corn seedlings. We're going to start with slugs. Slugs is highlighted here. This is a key word. Slugs are not at all affected by seed treatments. I would say these are probably our most significant group of corn pests. We have two species, the marsh, or when I say most significant of the corn pests, I mean of the invertebrate corn pests. Alyssa or Mark might take issue with me saying the most significant pest of them all. So we've got two species, marsh slugs and gray garden slugs. Marsh slugs are they're small, they're black or very dark, kind of a brownish grayish black, and they are active all year round. I even had slugs crawling around on my patio about 8 days ago. So this here is a slide of a graph of slug activity during the spring from a field here in Sussex County. This is all marsh slug, and you can see we've got hatchlings as early as March 20th, and we've got juvenile slugs all season long until June. The field was tilled right there at the end of May. We also have gray garden slugs, and these overwinter primarily as eggs, especially in cold winters. I'm optimistic that this winter will push them back a little bit. They start hatching out somewhere around the end of March to maybe like the first week or so of April. So this graph here is a field from Sussex County last year, in which we didn't see our first neonates hatching out of the eggs until the very last bit of March. It kind of just slowed down a little bit and then picked back up after the full first week of April. Similar story. This year we sampled 9 fields, and this was the only field that we had a lot of gray garden slugs in it. And you can see they all appear pretty much at the same time, right there at the end of March. Recently, there's a suggested published threshold last year by some folks out of Penn State and John Tooker's lab specifically, where over the course of 4 years of corn trials, they came up with a threshold of 1 slug per square foot. And what they work with in Pennsylvania is primarily gray garden slugs. This is equivalent to about 50% defoliation and about 10% stand loss. In favorable or wet weather years, Penn State entomologists have previously figured that an economic injury level for slugs was around 20% defoliation, and that typically maximum defoliation occurs between 3 and 4 weeks after planting. In dry years, that economic injury level is really high because slug activity is much reduced and the corn plants are growing a little bit better. You need to look at the entire field if you're going to be managing for slugs. I've seen fields where the front half of the field looked fine and the back half was completely torn up. So you do need to walk that field. They will set, they will set a stand back, but at what point is it worth not treating is still a good question. Our best management options in terms of rescue are soil disturbance, cultivation or tillage, and baits. If we're not treating or we're not replanting, what should we do? Well, you want to maintain nutrients and moisture to limit stress on those seedlings as much as possible, and they can catch up. We've got a new research entomologist at University of Delaware, Dr. Michael Crossley. He joins us from Georgia and Wisconsin, and he is bringing a student on board for slug research. So he's really excited to be getting into fields this spring. If you see him, you can't miss him. He's about 6'2", very tall, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from you and some of your observations with slug issues and slug management. Another pest that we ran into a little bit more this year and some other crops is seed corn maggot. Unlike slugs, seed corn maggot is favored by tillage. Typically, neonicotinoid seed treatments on corn provide adequate protection. And typically, if they do attack seedlings, they will feed on the cotyledons as it gets used up, as you can see in this picture here. However, they can overwhelm a seed treatment in the right conditions. So conditions that favor seed corn maggot: planting deep into cold soil with recent organic matter incorporation or tillage or manure. And also when all of those conditions meet during the peak seed corn maggot flight periods. Downstate, we generally get a peak flight somewhere between March 25th and April 10th. And that's going back about, the last 4 years. And then about 4 weeks later. So usually right around the first week of May. Generally speaking, warm soil equals faster crop growth and much less seed corn maggot impact. So if you're planting in a kind of a riskier time window and with recent organic matter incorporation, you want to do everything you can to make sure that seedling gets out of the ground as fast as possible. This here is just a picture of peas, further highlighting how these things can overwhelm a seed treatment. On the left here, this is a cruiser seed treatment. And on the right, this was diazinon applied to the soil surface. And this here in the center is various seedlings, roughly arranged by how deep those seeds were in the furrow. So you can see seedlings that are up near the surface were growing. Seedlings that were deepest ended up succumbing to seed corn maggot. Our next group of seedling pests are stink bugs. Last year, NC State entomologist Dominic Reisig revised stink bug threshold recommendations. So in the seedling stages, you'll want to treat field corn if you see more than 13 stink bugs per 100 plants. Now, typically, we don't see a whole lot of stink bugs in the early vegetative stages, but there are some situations and scenarios in which they can move into field corn. This was the biggest reduction in the threshold recommendations, is at the pre-tasseling stage. So right up until VT, so this is like just before VT to at VT. Treat if you see 10 stink bugs in 100 plants. And then once you get into the R1 to R2, maybe R3 stage, the threshold goes up pretty high. You don't have to look at the entire plant. Brown stink bugs are going to concentrate themselves at that ear zone. So roughly about a leaf above to a leaf or two below where that primary ear is pushing out of the plant is where you want to look for them. They will hide deep in the leaf axils, so you want to pay special attention to that area as well. Now, a couple of scenarios in which you can see some more stink bug injury early. If you're terminating a rye cover crop very late. In Georgetown last year, we had a cover crop termination experiment with Mark Van Gessel and Alyssa Kaler and Jared. And plots that did not have a cover crop or were terminated 4 weeks prior, we really didn't see any stink bug injury on those plants. But our plots that were terminated 3 days after planting and even 7 days prior to planting, we had more stink bug injury on those seedlings. Fields that are near wood lines, and especially if the previous field was a very late soybean, may experience more stink bug pressure as those stink bugs were overwintering in those wood lines and coming back out. The reason I say late season soybean is because late soybeans are the last thing in the environment for stink bugs to feed on before winter. And then finally, any field corn that is adjacent to wheat or barley. Brown stink bugs put their first generation in small grains. So once small grains come off, those browns have to move to keep feeding. Now, brown stink bugs are a little bit less sensitive to pyrethroids. Some people suspect that's because they do put their first generation into wheat and barley, which often receive a pyrethroid application with a fungicide spray. Of the pyrethroids, bifenthrin has the most stink bug activity. In our area, probably the most important timing is really this V14 to VT timing for stink bug management. Now, stink bugs are typically along field edges. So if you're a farmer or a consultant whose customer is not set up to do a border spray, you'll want to check interior plants to make sure that you're not calling in a spray just based on edge counts, which tend to be quite a bit higher than interior field counts. Speaking of prophylactic treatments, stink bugs are one of the few pests that we can actually manage fairly well timing wise, but we do need to use the right pyrethroid with them. In fields that do not have stink bug pests, we're not really hitting much if we tank mix an insecticide with a fungicide. Typically, that application is going to go out somewhere between tassel and full silk. In timely planted field corn, we don't have a whole lot of worm pressure. Even if worm pressure is high, that application doesn't pay off very well. Last year, we had a field corn trial. We had a non-BT variety, a VT Double Pro, and a Tricepta variety, where we sprayed at full silk with 10 ounces of besiege. And there was no differences in terms of yield with or without that insecticide application. You do risk flaring mites and aphids if you tank mix pyrethroids in applications. And Kelly Hamby over at University of Maryland has been doing large strip trials for a number of years and has not seen any benefit to that tank mix. Real quick, wireworms, these are also typically controlled with seed treatments. The last couple of seasons, I've been baiting fields early and digging holes. Typically, I end up doing this on the coldest, wettest day in late March or mid-April, which makes for a very miserable time digging holes in fields. There is a threshold for wireworms. It's roughly 1 wireworm per hole or per bait station. I'm going to say that it's probably the easiest just to dig holes for wireworms and not bait a field. Here on the bottom left, this is a field that I put almost a dozen bait stations in. And before I came back to retrieve those bait stations, the farmer had disked it up, and I found 1 of those bait stations out of 12. Under high pressure, a mid-rate seed treatment plus an in-furrow pyrethroid is more cost-effective than a high seed treatment rate. This here picture on the right, this is a corn seedling that has been fed upon by slugs, but also by wireworms. You can tell it by this bright yellow streak. It's usually going to be confined to one side of a leaf or another. Instead of striping, it's going to be like maybe a whole half of a leaf. That is very characteristic for wireworm injury below ground. Now, BT is your second keyword for this talk. The primary target for BT technology is European corn borer. And this is only the second European corn borer I've ever seen in my life. Some of the older folks here might chuckle at that. But since BT technology came out and was widely adopted, European corn borer populations have really tanked. Corn earworm developed resistance to BT. So every year we have sentinel sweet corn plots that Galen Dively organizes. And we've got some of the major BT trait packages. So this is performance in sweet corn, which is equivalent to VT Double Pro. We've got attribute in sweet corn. And then this variety here, the remedy, that has the Viptera trait in it, which is going to be in Tricepta or Viptera field corn. And that's the only variety or the only trait package that is still very effective on corn earworm. So when is BT beneficial? Late in the season. This ear here on the bottom left, this is a picture that I took from field corn that this is August field corn, mid-August when it was starting to silk. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 earworms in that ear. So how do you know which traits are what? There's the handy BT trait table. If you Google search that, it'll take you to a website, follow a link or two, and you will find it. This organizes trait packages in alphabetical order, gives you what they have in them and what pests they are marketed for, and any pests that may have developed resistance to them. So it's a very handy reference guide. There's another really good reference material that row crop entomologists across the Southeast have put together this year. It's called My IPM App for row crops. You can download this app. You can download it for various crops. We've got corn, cotton, peanut, sorghum, soybeans. There's also a version for fruit crops. And that app gives you management recommendations, cultural management, pictures, chemical control. It's a very handy resource. So check that one out. Moving along, wrapping this up. This year we're doing a ditch survey to see how agricultural drainage ditches support beneficial insect communities. I've got a fellow working in my lab, Dylan Wilkerson, who is leading this effort. It's a joint effort with us, University of Maryland, and University of Maryland Eastern Shore. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a brief Qualtrics survey on ditches that we're trying to gain some insight on how y'all manage them and how important they are in your farmscape. This year, we started participating with Syngenta's Pest Patrol. This is a free service that you can subscribe to. If you go to Syngenta's Pest Patrol website, you can sign up to receive alerts for different regions across the country. So for us, it would be Delmarva. And whenever one of the Mid-Atlantic specialists makes a recording on an issue that they're seeing in the field, we send that to Syngenta. Syngenta posts that and then text messages all subscribers. You get that text message, you click on a link, and it plays the audio recording. So it's very handy. Chlorpyrifos, urgent updates on this. Food tolerances for chlorpyrifos expire February 28th of this year. What that means is that basically all agricultural uses of this product will no longer be permitted. If a product has chlorpyrifos residues, it will be out of compliance and rejected. There's pretty much the only ag use for this material is going to be on fruit tree bark for trees that have not yet been bearing and will not be bearing for 1 year after application. This also extends to poultry houses. Due to potential contamination of live poultry from chlorpyrifos that could result in traces of this pesticide in processed meat, growers should not use this pesticide in areas where live meat producing animals are raised. And let's see, so existing stocks cannot be used on food uses. The only use that would still be allowable is for commodities that are used for export only, and only if the receiving country allows for chlorpyrifos. My other update here, Vantacor is a new formulation of chlorantraniliprole, which is what Coragen and Previthon are. That is on the market. Its use rate is roughly half that of Coragen's.
All right, thank you, David.